to never steer me wrong. So lead on, good shepherd, lead on.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the For His Namesake podcast, where we talk about leadership skills for this generation they can use not only in their church, school, and community, but most importantly, their entire Christian walk. And so today, for our next chapter in our book, we have Mr. Aaron Pendergraft with us. So thank you for coming on. And just so everybody can know a little bit about you, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Aaron Pendergraft. I am the worship pastor at Cramerton Church, and I've been here since 2015. Before that, just to go all the way back, I went to Faith Christian Academy growing up, and then from there I went to Southeastern for 4 years, and then in 2005 I graduated from Southeastern, and I moved down to Florence, South Carolina. I was the worship pastor at First Free Baptist Church and Maranatha Christian School under Lee Patrick's. He was the pastor there under him for 10 years, and then I got the call from Pastor Josh Bear. Danny Dwyer was retiring, so Josh Bear was going to be the new pastor, and he asked us to come and pray about, being the worship pastor there at Cramerton, and we felt like the Lord was leading our family to Cramerton, so we've been here since 2015, so going on 11 years at Cramerton, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
That's awesome. And over that time, what are some leadership positions you've had over the years?
Yeah. So I went to college. I did music education at Southeastern under Mark Going, who's still there. And so, I went to Florence Church, and I was the worship pastor at the church. I also was the music director in the Christian school. And that's what I did there, and I'm doing the same thing kind of here at Cramerton. In addition to being worship pastor, I was also the alumni president at Southeastern for, I think, 6 years. Mm-hmm. It was 2 stints of 3 years, I believe, and so that was pretty cool to be the alumni president, just kind of rally the alumni troops to come back to college and serve and be more involved. So that's basically it.
That's awesome. And over that time, who are some people that you've looked up to in leadership?
Yeah, so the first 2 are personal, and then the other 3 are still personal, but just a little different. So my dad and my granddaddy were my first 2, and my granddaddy was just a great leader. He was a great businessman. Bobby Flores was his name. He passed away in 2021, but he was just a great spiritual leader, lay person, but very mission-minded. He supported Southeastern. He supported what's now Welch College, and he really encouraged me to go into ministry. And there were some family opportunities with jobs to stay in Goldsboro, but he encouraged me not to do that. He encouraged me just to go into ministry and use the gifts that God had given me for the kingdom. My dad was a great leader as well, a great influencer on me. And then the other 3 are Dan Patrick, who was my pastor growing up. I love Brother Dan. I think his sermons through the decade and a half that I was under his leadership just kind of formed and shaped who I am. Christian Powell was my youth pastor growing up, and he is an amazing leader and has had such impact on my life. I am in ministry today because of Christian Powell. He took us to the Gospel Light Youth Conference every year. And I remember when I was 15, Steve Robertson was preaching, and he preached on a blank check, just giving God a blank check. And so I went down to the altar and said, Lord, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I don't know what direction exactly you're calling me in, but I do know that I want to give you a blank check with my life. I want to serve you wholly and do everything I can for you. And I surrendered my life to full-time ministry at 15. And then Lane Patrick from there kind of developed me as a musician and as a worship pastor. And Lang, who is Dan's son, had a tremendous impact on my life and encouraged me to do worship. And so I feel like Christian Powell kind of led me into ministry, and then Lang kind of led me into music ministry, and so encouraged me to go Southeastern. And so all of those guys kind of formed and helped, build who I am today.
That's awesome. And over those people that you look up to and the opportunities that you've had, if you could describe leadership in one word, what would it be and why?
That's a great question. And I would say the one word to me that describes leadership, and I've seen this from other people, and I try to emulate this in my own life. That word is servanthood. A lot of people in the worship ministry, what I do, They see, the person in front of people singing, sometimes solos, sometimes with the choir, sometimes the lights and those kind of things. And that's not the correct view of what a leader really is. A leader is the one who prepares behind the scenes and prays behind the scenes, and just serves people with nothing to expect in return.
Mhm.
And I feel like in ministry, that is who the true leaders are. Not the ones that you see the most, not the ones that are on stage leading or preaching, but servanthood is leadership to me. And I've seen that happen with Christian Powell. I know that he prays behind the scenes for every teenager, for now that he's pastor, every church member. He is serving in that way, and he is cleaning up the church when people aren't looking. He's working behind the scenes to honor God, and I know that servanthood is what a true leader is.
That's awesome. And
Mhm.
so your chapter, so Mr. Pendergraft wrote our 11th chapter in the book called Worship. And so originally, to be honest, worship wasn't even in the book. It was a kind of a last minute change, but it wasn't really last minute because I had to wait another 6 months to other people to finish their chapter. But anyways, we added worship to the book, and I think it was a really great addition because I mean, in leadership, you know, we're always worshiping something. And even as Christians, we're just worshiping something, but are we worshiping the right thing or the
Mhm.
right person, which is God, of course? So in your chapter, Mr. Pendergraft, you opened up just with this simple statement, and I think it just overviews your entire chapter, and it says, true worship is what we're made for. So that statement just kind of asking you, like, why is worship so important in a leadership?
Well, worship is just all encompassing in life, and it's so much more than just what we do at church on Sundays. It's so much more than singing. A lot of people equate worship to like being a part of a choir, like or being in the praise team. Those things are worship, but worship is really just it's our response to God's goodness to us. And once we stop for half a second and just think, man, the Lord saved me. We just celebrated Easter last Sunday, and today at church we were I was just so overwhelmed with joy of the fact that we serve a risen Savior. He's alive. His Holy Spirit lives within us, and when we think about how good He's been to us, our response to that is our worship. And I know that God has been so good to me, and I want to, in return, give Him back my whole life and worship Him. So yeah, we're made for that. If we live through life and don't worship the Creator, the person, the man who created us, if we go through life without doing that, then we're being selfish.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, worship is what we're made for, and it's our response to God's goodness to us in our life.
Yeah. And your chapter, you really, I think you had a really good, it was different from everybody else, but it was a really good approach. You went basically through the entire Bible and
Hmm.
worship in people's lives. And so in the Old Testament, there's one part that kind of a section called Worship Wars.
Yeah.
And at the end of that, you say, we see how pride can interfere with God and receiving our worship. So how can pride get in the way when we're worshiping?
Yeah. Well, there's always been worship wars, and it started when Jesus, created the earth, and then the devil got in the way, and the devil wanted that worship. He didn't want Jesus to receive that worship, so then he steps in to try to get people to worship him, and he wants us to sin, and so. Pride is so involved in worship, and we have to get rid of it to truly worship Jesus Christ, because the natural human instinct is to let pride, we want to worship ourselves. We want to lift ourselves up and to be the one, to be worshiped in a sense. And so when we can turn from that pride, turn away in humility and worship the true King of Kings that created us, that's what Jesus wants. And so there are worship wars throughout the Old Testament. And we see those in the chapter. And when we can turn away from those and turn away from that pride and worship the true King of Kings in humility, that's when Jesus is most proud of us.
Yeah. And also, kind of a little bit after that, you talk about that there's obstacles that often get in the way of worship. So what are some other obstacles, that can get in the way of our worship to God?
Man, there are so many. Obstacles of worship. I mean, in a church service, it can be the kid crying. It can be a parent that's busy. It can be so many things like that that get in the way. It can be just, honestly, for me, it's busyness. just staying so busy that my head's in the sand, doing different things, and I just don't make the time that I should to just stop and worship, stop and pray, and there are obstacles like that to even us today, and so. The challenge would be to minimize those obstacles and see what they are and try to get rid of those and worship Jesus the best we can and not let anything else get in the way of that.
hmm And also with that, you said in that section that worship is a choice, and that at the end of the day, we're always choosing to worship whatever we're worshiping.
Hmm.
And so, like, why is it so important that we choose to worship the Lord?
Well, I mean, there's an old chorus that I learned called "After All He's Done for Me," and it says, "After all He's done for me, how could I do less than give Him my best and live for Him completely? After all He's done for me." And when we stop to think for just a moment of all that God's done for us, how could we not give Him our worship? And so, man, it should be a natural response.
Mhm.
And so, I want to be the kind of Christian, the kind of person that can put everything else aside and just worship in our life. A lot of people choose to worship money. A lot of people choose to worship, addictions and things that they get caught up in. But man, when we can turn to the one true God and worship Him, that's where it's at.
Yes. And in the while you're still going through the Old Testament, you talked about Job and
Hmm.
that he was the essence of a true worshiper because even though he lost everything, he still remained faithful to God. And
Hmm.
so, how, in spite of like hard circumstances we face when it's difficult to worship, and even if we're like Job and we lose everything, that I mean, there's really nothing to be grateful for because everything we had is gone. How do
hmm
we worship despite difficult circumstances in our lives?
Well, Job learned to worship through surrender. And he had nothing else to fall back on in his life. Everything was taken, and his life was in shambles. But he understood that the one thing that held true for him was that he could just worship Jesus because of who Jesus is. Jesus is enough. We don't have to have anything else. And so, honestly, the surrender that Job had enabled his worship. And so, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, people are holding on to so much. But when we can lay everything else down and just stop and focus on the Lord, that's where it's at. And Job was able to do that.
hmm And also with that, I think it's important, and we kind of been talking about it, that make sure our heart's right for worship
Hmm.
and preparing ourselves for worship. And so you said that we understand that only when our horizontal relationships are right can our vertical relationship in
Hmm.
worship be right. So why is it important that we have our relationships here with the people that surround us right and prepare our hearts for worship to God?
Yeah, I mean, so many people. I say so many. There's a lot of people in our life that a lot of people that worship. Their relationships horizontally are not what they should be.
Mm,
They might have, a parent that they need to apologize to, or they might have a brother or sister that they have an issue with, or they might have a distant family member or a coworker or a boss, whatever the situation is. And those are hindrances to our worship. We need to have a clean slate, a clean heart before God before we can worship. I think it's important to have that. And so when we get those horizontal relationships right and we ask forgiveness and do the hard things, that's when we'll truly see God work in our lives as we worship Him. And we'll receive blessings as well. I know God, He blesses obedience, and we see God's judgment often when we're disobedient.
mhm.
And so I think the more we can be obedient and ask the forgiveness and have those correct horizontal relationships, then at that point will God, do something special when we worship Him
Mhm.
vertically.
That's awesome. And then kind of transitioning to the next section is the when you went through the New Testament. When you went through the New Testament, you really just highlighted the life of Jesus.
Hmm.
And we learn how to worship from Jesus himself. So what are like some of the principles that we can look at Jesus' life and take away when we worship the Father?
Yeah. So, obviously Jesus is our example of what true worship is, and He gave of Himself. He died on the cross for our sins, and he was really showed that worship is giving your all, honestly, to worship God. And Jesus worshiped through prayer. He worshiped through praise. He worshiped in the church, in the sanctuary. He worshiped by submission. He worshiped through song. So there's so many different examples that Jesus showed of his life, those 33 years that he was on earth, of how we can worship God by emulating some of those things. And so, Jesus did worship through song, and that is part of it, but he also worshiped through surrender and so many other ways too. And so worship is not just one thing. It's giving our lives completely and wholly to the Lord. And that's what Jesus did when he gave his life on the cross for us. He did that for God and did that for us. And so all of Jesus's life was an expression of his worship to God, his Father, as he served him in thought, word, and in deed. And that's what we got to do as well.
Hmm. And also, kind of in your chapter, it talked a little bit about looking forward to the future.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's evident in the book of Hebrews and mostly in Revelation, how one day we're going to sit before the throne and worship the Lord forever and ever. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, how now in the present, how much should we look forward to the future with Jesus, worshiping him forever?
Yeah. Look, I tell our church choir all the time, I'm like, one day when we get to heaven, we're going to be able to worship forever. But let's not wait until then. Like, let's learn how to get good at it now. Because, man, one day forever is a long time. And if we're going to be worshiping forever, I want to be really, really good at it.
Mm,
And so I tell our church choir and our praise team, I'm like, let's worship like nobody's watching. Sometimes people sing in the shower and they're like, uninhibited, like they're singing with their singing so loud and they could care less who hears them.
hmm
That's how I want to sing at church. I want to worship God uninhibited. I want to, if the Lord, if I feel the Holy Spirit raising my hand or getting on my knees or whatever the case is when I'm worshiping, I want to do that uninhibited. And I think sometimes we let things hold us back, whether it's pride, whether it's what somebody else is going to think of us. But worship is something we're going to do forever. And so I tell our choir, let's get good at it now. And this is a dress rehearsal for eternity. And so let's worship uninhibited now.
That's awesome. And so, kind of in closing, in your application section, you said practice makes perfect. And so, just in closing for everybody, as a worship pastor, and that you've done this for a long time now, and just of what you observed and everything, what would you say are some of the really key things to remember in worship?
Yeah. So practice makes perfect. And none of us in this life are ever going to achieve, perfection spiritually. We're all a work in progress and we're all trying to get there. But I would say in worship, let's just all understand that worship is it's really a lifestyle. It does involve music, and it involves listen to the right kind of music.
Mhm.
But it involves filling your heart and your mind and your soul with wholesome music that can challenge you and encourage you to live for the Lord. There's some junk out there, even with a Christian label on it.
Mhm.
So we have to be selective in the types of music that we let in. But I think it's important to find the right kind of music that speaks to us theologically and has a strong, it's strong theologically in nature. And we need to make sure that words we're singing is important and that they're correct. And I think it just, singing the songs, knowing the words, worshiping like no one's around, and then doing it all throughout life in everything that we do in life. It's not just at church. It's really the other 6 days of the week are where we can worship the most. How often we share our faith and really encourage others and just live a testimony of what God's done for us in life. And I think those things will help us prepare for eternity and help us, although we will not achieve perfection in this life, it'll help us get there a little bit closer.
Mhm. And that's awesome. And just remembering the fact that worship is not just limited to church, that
Yes.
every single day of our lives, every breath that we breathe should be worshiping God with not even just our voice, but with our gifts and talents that He's given us. And so that
Mhm.
everything we do would be for His glory. So, but thank you for coming on today, Mr. Pendergraft.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you putting this book together and getting all these great men of God. I don't feel, like I should be included in this group, but thank you so much for including me. And I do feel like worship does have a place in leadership. So I'm glad you chose to put a chapter on worship in this book. And I pray all of God's blessings on you. I'm
Yes.
proud of you.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you. And so thank you for everybody that tuned in today. And I hope to see y'all next time. We'll have Brother Jeff Manning on his chapter. So thank y'all and have a good rest of your week. See ya.